have registered should be able to join in soon. All right, welcome everybody. We're not quite yet ready to start, but I want to make sure you all had a chance to get into the webinar room. My name's Adam Schmidt. I'm the administrator for the Washington Climate Core Network. I'll be hosting today's presentation. Now, as we trickle in, I'll go through a few of the controls before we get formally started, in case you're not as intimately familiar with Teams as Matt and I are. Okay, so we'll get started probably right at 11:05. I'll do a little intro here for you all just to familiarize you with Microsoft Teams controls. If you have any questions, you can always put them in the chat, and we'll have a dedicated time for Q&A at the end for any other questions related to the presentation. But first, just some digital housekeeping. So as we go through today's webinar, you'll see the controls displayed in the top right of your window like this. I'll go through each of them briefly so you can fully participate. First, this profile icon will bring up the full list of presenters and attendees on the right-hand side of your window. This is a useful tool to see who's joining us live at today's webinar. Second, this bubble icon displays the chat. Selecting this will allow you to type and view chats from myself and fellow attendees or other presenters throughout the meeting. Third, we have this emoticon icon with a hand. Selecting this will allow you to react to the webinar. I may ask for reactions throughout today's presentation, and this feature is just a really great way to quickly communicate with the presenter if you can hear them or understand the content that you're seeing. If you click on the icon, it will display the hand reactions on the left and allow you to use the raise hand feature. When you raise your hand on Teams, it notifies the presenter that you would like to speak or have a question you would like to ask. During the Q&A portion of today's webinar at the end of the presentation, I'll invite you all to raise your hand to ask a question. Your profile will be outlined in yellow for me, and I'll call your name in the order that I see them listed, giving you the ability to unmute and display your video. It might take a few seconds as I have to manually allow you to unmute. Once you've asked your question, I'll lower your hand and move on to another question from the audience. You can raise your hand multiple times throughout today's presentation, and if you want to lower it, you just repeat these steps to lower your hand back down. Finally is the red leave button. Selecting this will close the webinar for you today, but it does not end the webinar for anyone else. If you click this by accident, of course, you can always rejoin the webinar live by following the registration link in your inbox. And finally, we have the three dots icon here. If you select them, highlighted in a yellow circle on the image, you'll access the full menu that drops down. This has several options for you. I'm just going to highlight two that I think are important for you. First, in the yellow box is the device settings option. This allows you to adjust your device settings such as your speakers, your microphone, and your camera at any time. It's important because when we get to the Q&A portion of today's meeting, it's a quick way to make sure that you know you'll be able to speak and be heard clearly. So let's adjust those. Once you select the device settings, you'll see a screen like this. You'll be able to go through your speakers, your microphone, your video devices. In this screenshot I have shown here, I've selected computer audio. And if I was to adjust those devices, I could click on the horizontal bars circled in yellow now. This would bring up a variety of options that you can select through. To make sure my camera is working, I can click on this button now. I'm highlighting in the lower left. And if I select the gear icon, it's circled in red, I'll be able to adjust which camera in case I have multiple plugged in to my laptop or computer. If you're having trouble or would like to revisit your setup, you can use the three dots menu as we went through before in the top right corner of your Teams window to adjust these settings at any time. Once you've selected the right options, we'll click Save from this screen and return back to the webinar. Now that we're back in the webinar window, in the three dots menu again at the top of the screen, I'll highlight one final item. In the red box here is the option to turn on live captions. Selecting this will display Microsoft's live captioning system, which is auto-generated at the bottom of the presentation. And this can be really helpful, even though it's not 100% accurate. I find it's useful to see who's speaking, or in case I miss something, I can check out the captions below. Okay, with that, it's about 11:03. We've got about 35 members in attendance right now. We do anticipate about 60 total joining us today based on registration. So we'll give it just a few more minutes and then we'll get formally started with the webinar. Always a good idea to silence my phone before I get started speaking into a webinar. One final note before we get started here. This is being recorded. We'll make sure and post this live on our website as well. So just keep that in mind, especially when we get to the Q&A. If you have a personal question or something you don't want to have recorded, you can, of course, always email us. We'll put that information up throughout today's presentation, and I'll make sure and share it with you all as well at the end. Okay, so let's get started. Seeing about 40 folks here, and I'm sure we'll have a few more trickle in, but welcome. You are at the Washington Climate Corps Network grant webinar for the 2025-2027 biennium. My name is Adam Schmid. I am the administrator for the Washington Climate Corps Network, or WCCN for short, and I'll be your host throughout today's presentation. Again, we're hosting this live and recording it on May 14th, 2025. For those watching the recording later, changes may have occurred to the website or materials I'll be referencing throughout today's webinar. And to assure you have the most accurate and updated information, please visit our website for all the documents, deadlines, and news related to the WCCN. So over the next 90 minutes or so, we'll be going over a high-level overview of the WCCN and essential information you need to apply for the grant program. If you're joining us today, you'll be able to submit questions in the chat at any time and be able to raise your hands and ask your questions to us at the end during our Q&A portion of the presentation. Here's a preview of our webinar agenda. We'll go through a bit of background on the WCCN, some eligibility requirements, process and timeline details, what it means to join the network, and finally the resources and tools you'll be able to access to make sure you're eligible, aligned, and competitive for the WCCN grant program. Before we start all that, I'll turn it over to Director Matt Glazewski for some opening remarks. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Adam. And yes, hello. Good morning. Welcome to this FY 26-27 informational webinar for the Washington Climate Corps Network. As Adam said, my name is Matt Glazewski, and I'm the director of the Washington Climate Corps Network. I appreciate you all attending live and watching this video later. And I'm thrilled to see some very familiar faces here in the room, and also a lot of new names from across the state. So I'm joining you today, especially to provide a brief update and emphasize our commitments as we enter a new biennium. So as many of you are aware, the state of Washington has had a pretty tough financial outlook, and based on the latest economics projections, faced a budget deficit in the coming years. So the Washington State Legislature was required to present a balanced budget to the governor, and they did so on April 27th. Governor Ferguson has until May 20th to sign that bill into law, which has not yet occurred. So we have about another week. It is possible that he may call the legislature back for a special session to come up with a different funding bill. We don't really know. So therefore, the WCCN budget is not yet official, and the numbers presented today in this webinar are merely a projection based on the legislature's funding decision. It is possible that this will change. So as a reminder, the WCCN is funded entirely by the voter-sustained Washington Climate Commitment Act. While the CCA is an independent and dedicated funding source, it too was subject to some budget haircuts, and the WCCN was no exception. The legislature's funding bill authorized the WCCN a biennial budget of $3 million, a reduction of $2.374 million. This means that approximately $2.3 million or so will be budgeted for grants for the entire biennium if the current funding bill, again, is signed into law by the governor. While we have had some wonderful growth and success stories from our first biennium, the next will no doubt be much different. Firstly, due to the federal government's massive cuts to AmeriCorps program, the AmeriCorps program, a well-established service learning model throughout the state and country, it will no longer offer a clear path for partnership. However, with our commitment to advancing climate resiliency and the diversity of grantees' success stories from the last year, we feel confident that we will be able to forge partnerships of myriad types this funding cycle. Adam has worked very hard, thank you, Adam, to make significant updates and additions to our letter of intent and our application processes, including a comprehensive applicant toolkit, which he'll speak to you about shortly. For this next biennial funding year, my vision for the WCCN is going to continue its outreach to rural communities and strive to support projects not represented in our previous portfolio as a commitment to our goals of expanding climate service opportunities. Specifically, our primary foci will be on novel approaches to energy and emissions reduction projects, as well as carbon sequestration and the maritime industry. In the next biennium, I plan to do more in-person outreach to rural communities to further these goals, as Adam and I did last year. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about our network model. I say network because my vision for this program is to connect the nodes of folks working in this space across the state. And what I mean by this is that an organization doesn't necessarily have to be funded by us to be in the network. Last year, we signed several MOUs, memorandums of understanding, with organizations that operate service learning programs in Washington that align with the goals of the WCCN. We expect to have a new webpage live by July that will serve as a landing pad to share resources, information, and post opportunities for which organizations in the network are recruiting. My hope is that we will serve in a coordinating role for all things Climate Corps across Washington. I hope you enjoy the remainder of the webinar, and I encourage you to ask questions at the end or reach out if we can be of any assistance. Thank you again for joining us and for your commitment to a climate resilient future for Washington State. Adam?
Thank you, Matt. Give some reactions to Matt for that wonderful intro. I'll get our slides back up here as well. And yeah, feel free to drop any comments as well in the chat. Won't be able to react to all of them at this time, but it's always good to see what's sticking with us. All right. So to start things off, what is the Washington Climate Corps Network, or WCCN? If you haven't heard of this before, might be good to have a little bit of background. In this section, we'll discuss the background of our funding and the establishing legislation, our network's structure, and we'll give some examples of eligible climate service projects. Hopefully, this will give you a better perspective on how you might wish to partner with our grant program. First, let's discuss our established duties. The WCCN was established by Second Substitute House Bill 1176, which was signed into law on July 23, 2023. This bill empowers Serve Washington to grow climate-related service opportunities and train young adults and veterans to build a clean energy and climate-resilient communities, economies, and ecosystems with a priority on doing so in overburdened communities. Administer grants to support and broaden access to climate-related service projects with a priority to, again, do so in, for, or by members of overburdened communities. And to develop and administer a service learning program. This may take many forms and is developed in partnership, as Matt mentioned as well, with grantees and other partners across the state. So now that we know a little bit about the background, let's talk about the structure of the network model. The Washington Climate Corps Network, as the name and our logo demonstrates, is comprised of a layered network of professional and educational partners, climate service projects, and architects. The grant program relies upon a network of partners to create a climate resilient future. Connecting these partners together is the WCCN, which is funded by the Climate Commitment Act, and based in partnerships through a by and for theory of change, recognizing that one agency alone will not be able to bring about sufficient solutions to our climate challenges. Serve Washington, the agency charged with administering the grant funds, establishes partnerships with aligned efforts and partners, and advocates for governmental, workforce, and educational partners to support our climate resilient future. We see partnerships, networks, and professional educational associations as critical to the development of those pathways for architects seeking careers in the green or blue economies of the future. These partnerships will be a growing area of focus as we strive to push the network out to conventions, associations, and institutions invested in hiring, training, and advancing members and our network goals. Grantee organizations can look like nearly any agency, school, or community group. These organizations will host architects and demonstrate a clear ability to partner with their community to plan and implement climate service projects that create both a direct and meaningful benefit for their community. Finally, at the heart of the WCCN are the architects and mentors in climate service projects. The term architects demonstrates the crucial role these Washingtonians will play in building the linkages of our network. These could be students, veterans, young adults, members of overburdened communities. Really, a lot of folks can join the network in this way. In summary, the network is not maintained and implemented simply by one entity. We're looking to build a network of partnerships, institutions, and motivated individuals to create a statewide impact towards our climate resilient goals. Our goal is to use this structure to implement a series of novel and climate resilient service projects. Let's discuss some examples of what those service projects might look like. A service project is a coordinated community-based initiative designed to address specific public or environmental needs. These projects mobilize volunteers or service members to provide tangible, on-the-ground benefits to local communities. In the context of the WCCN, a service project specifically targets building low-carbon and climate-resilient communities, engaging participants in hands-on activities that advance environmental justice and improves community capacity in overburdened communities. Now on this slide, you'll see a few examples, but I encourage you to propose a project that addresses the effects of climate change in your community. They can be tailored and adjusted to the unique needs and strengths of your communities and its members. So some here on the screen you'll see listed might be new to you, something you maybe haven't heard of before, such as kelp forest restoration for blue carbon projects, where replanting and protecting kelp forests to sequester carbon, support marine biodiversity, and enhance coastal resilience. They also might be something that you're very familiar with or you see in your neighborhood, such as community solar and energy equity projects where architects could be planning and installing solar panels on community centers, schools, or low-income housing units to expand clean energy access. These, again, are examples. They're not exhaustive, and you should be in communication with your community to think beyond the maybe typical bounds you've had of service projects and think about what would really make the community you're invested in climate resilient. Now, let's put some boundaries on the grant program and discuss further eligibility and program details of the WCCN grants. In this next few slides, I'll go through those eligibility requirements of both architects, grant hosts themselves, and the actual program parameters you can expect when you're receiving grant funds. First, who is eligible to be an architect? Our establishing legislation identifies a few key requirements, which you'll list here under the first bullet. Please note that they do not have to hold all of these identities at once, but they must hold at least one. Although we do not require the architect to be from the community served by a proposed project, we're interested in partnering with organizations and projects conducting their member recruitment from the community that is being served by the project. Architects must also receive a living allowance or a stipend and participate in WCCN networking and training opportunities as they come about. You can also view the budget worksheet, which will be uploaded to our website and was also available in our last biennium to learn more about that appropriate tier living allowance if that's of concern to you. Now, let's review who is eligible to apply and receive a grant as a host for these architects. So we're interested in partnering with community-based organizations across the state. Recognizing that these partnerships don't necessarily work well in a one-size-fits-all approach, we're interested in partnering with nonprofits, academic institutions, local governments, tribes or tribal organizations, and smaller community organizations needing even fiscal sponsors. If you're eligible as an entity, applicants must also commit to achieving the goals of the WCCN, the member commitments, and work to maintain a minimum of 60% of service being conducted by and for members of overburdened communities. Our intention is to build resiliency by supporting local communities and their youth. All of this information can have a lot of terms that might be difficult to understand. Everything we talk about here today in the webinar, I really encourage you to look for in the applicant toolkit as well. We've got a definitions section at the bottom of the toolkit, as well as more in-depth details about our goals and what we mean by climate resilience. On the topic of overburdened communities, let's talk about that. We define overburdened communities as vulnerable populations in a geographic area facing combined multiple environmental harms and health impacts, and include but are not limited to highly impacted communities. Again, this is a very layered definition. You'll be able to read through it in the definition section of the applicant toolkit, which will be uploaded on our website. Our grant program is prioritizing overburdened communities in our service projects and partner organizations. This aligns with the requirements of the Climate Commitment Act and the HEAL Act of Washington. We aim to support no less than 40% of WCCN funds to provide direct and meaningful benefits to vulnerable populations within the boundaries of overburdened communities. And you can see the methods we have listed here on screen. To determine if your applicants benefit, we have included these principles again in our review and awarding process, and it's all listed in the applicant toolkit as well. A little different than last year. In the application and the toolkit, you'll find the overburdened communities map of Washington to help you identify what communities the state defines as overburdened. If you need any assistance in navigating or utilizing these tools, you can of course contact us via email. And I want to call out that sometimes maps don't perfectly capture the burden of a community, the environmental harms of a community. We've provided space in the application in the event you want to serve a community that isn't labeled as overburdened for you to explain maybe what's missing or what these data points are not getting that might be clearly demonstrating a burden for that community. And again, one other thing I'll call out on this slide before we move on is consistent throughout our application, our toolkit, and today's webinar. One of the expectations from the Climate Commitment Act is to be able to clearly show a clear and meaningful benefit to the community members themselves. We'll be asking that throughout the whole application and granting process, and you'll be expected to provide that in draft contracts as well. So that's a really important focus we have for this biennium. Now, let's take a look at the eligible expenses of WCCN contracts. If you were to be eligible, you have architects you want to bring on board, you have an overburdened community you want to serve. How could you spend those funds? All projects may structure budgets and invoices along 4 main areas of eligible expenses. First, we have personnel costs. These are expenses related to your organization's staff, wages, salaries, benefits. Second, we have goods and services. Now, this includes the majority of anticipated expenses to execute your project and support the architect. This would include things like listed on screen are the stipends, any equipment or supplies the members will use, any outreach or marketing opportunities you have to maybe invite members or get people from the community to participate. We expect a lot of the expenses for your projects to be under goods and services. Third is travel. This would support expenses for the members to get to and from a project, especially for folks in rural communities or where housing is really difficult to acquire close to a service project. Things like transit tickets or rentals to be able to get to and from networking events are eligible expenditures under this grant program. Finally, indirect costs. These can be up to 10% of your total budget and generally support any other elements of your organization or project that wouldn't fit in the other categories. Think of this as something that isn't directly tied to your project. Now, I know you might have a lot of questions about what is or isn't allowed on here. The big thing I'll say at this stage of the process is just focus on, is your project eligible? Is it competitive? Are you serving a community and are you partnering with that community to implement the project? A lot of these pieces will become most scrutinized during the contracting stage of our negotiations. In the application, it's important to put where you think these expenses will be, but you will not be pinned to the exact dollar amount you apply for, and we anticipate that some adjustment may happen, especially if awards are adjusted between your application and receiving a draft contract. So again, many of the anticipated costs will fall into those categories on the left, personnel and goods and services. But if there are any other questions, of course, you can contact us and we can adjust things on a case-by-case basis depending on your needs. Now, you may be interested in supporting a larger or a smaller project involving one or many of these categories, and we'll discuss funding levels and request requirements for your projects as well. So this grant program has 2 tiers of funding available to reflect the diversity of potential projects and invite a wider variety of project scales, scope, and length. The first tier is our cedar level, supporting grants requesting between $2,000 and $35,000. You can request less, but we anticipate most projects will fall somewhere in that range. Tier 1 projects or cedar projects are intended for smaller organizations and typically smaller scale projects that could be completed within a year or maybe even a few months. This level prioritizes spending on community participation and can support projects that are new or pilots for the community. Reporting requirements are a little lighter to invite applications with limited capacity, and the application itself is shorter in a Tier 1 application. Next, we have the second tier, or the hemlock level. This supports grants requesting over $35,000. And these are eligible for small and larger organizations and involve slightly more reporting requirements with budgets that can support more service members, more outreach, more project costs. The only other big difference I want to call out here is the application itself. All of the main categories of the application will be consistent, but we do ask for more detail in a Tier 2 applicant. The idea being that if you're requesting more funds, we want to see a little bit more structure and planning that's been put into the project. But for tier ones, especially for folks on the phone who maybe have never hosted a service project before, and it sounds a little intimidating, we are not asking for people to have decades and decades of established experience, especially if you're applying for a tier one project. That's where Matt's comments earlier about having novel and creative approaches really, I think, can shine, and especially being able to reach out into communities that have never received funding from the WCCN or ServWA generally. So again, both levels may support similar projects. Our intention is to encourage and expand the network to smaller, community-based, and newer organizations that are very tightly bound to the needs of their community. All the definitions and further detail of these levels will, of course, be in the toolkit. You'll probably hear me say that 200 times today. Now, we have an eligibility idea for the eligibility and structure of the WCCN. Let's dive into what we expect and offer to folks who are going to be joining the network, what that means. So if you submit an application and receive a WCCN grant, there are 5 elements to be implemented by all grant partners. First, we expect folks to be seeking out local community partners to advance the goals of the project and the architect's development. Second, recruiting members from the overburdened communities being sold. One thing we've heard from communities is it's great to have investment and ideas for projects, but how are we helping develop the people that are there that need those skills and those opportunities? Third, including a preference in recruiting individuals who represent the diversity of communities being served in the project description. Fourth, ensuring participants receive a stipend amount that corresponds to the defined tier for their service location. We recognize that we aren't going to be paying top tier salaries, but it's important too that we see members are not receiving less than is valuable for them to be able to sustain themselves and survive while implementing a service project. Finally, implementing the project in accordance with the milestones and timelines of the executed grant agreement. So these are the basic expectations for folks who are going to be joining the network. Now let's discuss what architects can expect across all service projects. As Matt and I have both mentioned, the WCCN is a growing network of projects and people. To support that growth, we're implementing a new requirement for service projects in this biennium to contain elements of community engagement and storytelling. First, all service projects awarded will involve an architect-based community engagement activity. These engagements can look very different depending on the shape of the projects and the needs of the architect and the community. At a base level, we would like these engagements to involve elements of education, outreach, or engagement and feedback with members of the community. Essentially, guys, the idea is that if you are doing a great service project and it's supporting something really valuable, we need to make sure and talk about it. And it's not just something that we want to be leading from the top with. We want to have our members who are most familiar with this being expected to come out into the communities that they're serving and telling folks about the great work that they're doing and how it's making their community more climate resilient. Education is important here. Another element of capturing service projects' impacts is hearing the stories of service from across the network. In this biennium, we are asking each WCCN-funded architect to share their personal narrative at a few key stages during their service term. And again, this can be adjusted based on the scale and length of your service project. But ideally, we would see 3 narratives being shared with the WCCN network, and we could therefore share it across the state. Maybe an initial submission somewhere after they've accepted the position. This is really helpful to learn why they came and joined the project in the first place. A midterm submission, maybe following some significant achievement or after participating in a key training or networking event for their project. And finally, a third submission following the architect's leadership in hosting or leading a community engagement activity. The idea behind this isn't to necessarily overburden them with lots of other things to do, and they can submit their narrative in a variety of ways. We're setting up a campaign system where they can record audio, video, or even write if they would like. But it's just to capture what are the impacts we're having beyond installing solar panels, beyond doing some sort of restoration project. How is it changing the people of Washington that are joining service? Finally, let's look at what grant organizations can expect to develop and the reach and scope of the network. So to continue the gains made by the previous biennium, we want to continue to regularly engage programs via gatherings and architect trainings. And in short, programs are asked to support the development of networks through 4 key actions. Participating in the calls. Folks who may be on here who are currently funded by the WCCN know we've been hosting a monthly network call just to share news from across the state, but also to hear from you as programs and see what can we be doing to better support you or maybe adjust the way we do business. Sharing resources and challenges is a great way to also learn what else is happening and how your program might be able to adjust if you face a similar problem. Second, sharing timely activity updates with the WCCN on project activities. Third, complying with WCCN and CCA requirements, or CCA again is the Climate Commitment Act requirements. There are a few things around branding and communication that we want to be consistent on to show people of Washington where this project came from. Being able to tell them that it's funded by the Climate Commitment Act and supported by the Washington Climate Core Network is crucial for people in our community to see the impacts of the support they've given to these funds. Finally, amplifying network announcements and communications. We're just going to ask that people make sure and help us if we're trying to get out the word on some of those storytelling opportunities we've received. If we have press or media events, we want to make sure and share across the network that we ask folks who are taking grant funds to make sure and help us amplify that out to their members and out to their communities as well. These will mostly be pretty well telegraphed. You'll know about these things in advance. But the idea is just that if you're going to join and be a part of the network, it's more than just having a grant contract and spending money doing good things. It's about growing the overall impact and sharing the overall reach of the network across the state. Okay, I know it was a lot. That's it for network expectations. In this next section, we'll go over the process by which you submit your letter of intent and develop your application, the timeline you can expect, and the resources you can access to put forth your best application. So the application process contains 4 key steps. First, review our website, toolkit, and application preview. This will prepare you to understand our priorities, our goals, and our requirements, especially the toolkit. I can't emphasize it enough. Contains everything that we've been talking about thus far. It also contains the sections you can expect from the application and important priorities to maintain whenever you are drafting your application. After reviewing that information, you'll submit a letter of intent, including the overview of the proposed service project, the communities you intend to serve, and the benefits this project will have for both the communities and the architects serving. Third, if you're successful in your letter of intent, you'll receive feedback and/or an invitation to apply for the Washington Climate Core Network grant program. I, again, highly encourage you to use the application preview we've uploaded online to prepare yourself before you actually open the Smartsheet form. For those of you who are familiar, or maybe those who aren't, we use Smartsheet, a web-based form, which allows you to really easily submit via mobile device, tablet, or desktop computer, but it's really hard to save your answers there, especially if you close the browser. So using the application preview as a Word document, you can draft all your answers in there, and they will look very similar when you just go to paste it in there. There are a few character requirements, and in general, I would say on our application process, we're looking for brevity and direct responses. You don't have to be telling us why climate change is a problem. Matt and I are very familiar with that. We want to know what your novel approach is going to do to advance our climate resiliency goals, so you can be as brief as you would like and allow us to ask more questions if needed. Applications will be reviewed on an initial timeline following a rolling monthly timeline, which we'll go over soon. I just want to also call out, I know I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. I will get to all of them, I promise you. We'll even go over the website and we'll go over the documents as well. And for those, of course, watching this recording, you're already on the website, so great job. So let's review the process in full. Start by determining your level of partnership. Verify your eligibility using this webinar, the applicant toolkit, as well as the stated goals and requirements. Submit your letter of intent. Include crucial details we ask for. WCCN staff will review letters within 2 business days. We're going to try and do it as fast as possible, especially given a crunched timeline here at the beginning for folks who have programs that are ongoing that they're seeking continuation funds for in some way, or maybe they have a program that's going to start at July 1 and they want to be a WCCN partner from day 1. But then we'll return that letter of intent with feedback, or we'll invite you to apply via Smartsheet as well. Then draft your responses, revise your budget, and submit your application. Following that, once you've submitted, WCCN staff again will review the application on a published timeline determined by your application submittal date. So if it's early, you'll have, you can see in our toolkit, and I'll go over here in just a moment, the specific dates we plan to review all applications. After this initial round one phase, we're going to kick it again back to a rolling monthly timeline, which if you're familiar with the WCCN, happens again like a 4-week turnaround from the time of initial application to draft negotiations for a contract. We expect contract negotiations to last between 1 and 3 weeks. It really depends on how much changes between what you requested and what you're awarded. And I want to also reiterate, in your application, you will be asked about deliverables, milestones, timeline, budget, and general scope of your work. That is the basis we will use to draft a contract. So we don't start from fresh. We use a lot of what you put in the application. So I really encourage you to, again, put in there what you think you can implement and allow us to cut things or remove things. And once we make an award recommendation back to you, of course, you will be able to adjust the timeline, the milestones. If, for example, you requested a certain amount and we were only able to fund it at a lower amount, we expect those negotiations to occur then. I want to really pause here. Your contract is not executed, and you cannot begin expenses until the date of the DocuSign has been sent around. So we'll negotiate for a while. Maybe there's things I need to change. Maybe there's things you need to change. But once we've all agreed to the contract, I will initiate a DocuSign system, thanks to the great help from folks like Denise I see on the call, and we'll circulate that between Serve Washington's WCCN staff and you as the grantee. But you are not under contract until everyone has received a copy of that and signed that contract, and you will receive an auto notification from DocuSign saying it is complete. I really emphasize this because during that initial part where you get an award, it feels like you can start building things and buying things and making sure that you're hiring members. But if I get any invoices from before that time, I am not allowed to support them. So really, really, really be mindful of that contract execution date is different than your award date. Finally, you're able to begin project implementation. It's a long process, but you made it there along the timeline that's outlined in the contract. And again, that's why it's important that you review it and take part in that negotiation fully. All contracts must conclude by June 30th, 2027. Contracts may also end before this date, but they cannot extend past that date, and I will not be able to guarantee funds past June 30th, 2027. Again, contingent upon the governor's signing of the budget as proposed. So now that we understand the full process, let's take a look at the timelines for the first window to apply and then that continuous rolling window, which will be open so long as there are funds available. So round one, the application was released today, May 14th, 2025, and will be iteratively updated from applicant feedback. Letters of intent will receive an official response from WCCN staff within 2 business days of submittal, and to be considered for funding in round one for an early July start date, applicants must submit the form by June 2nd at 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I want to pause here too. I know this is a very cramped timeline, and we anticipate not expending all of our funds in this window. This is really to try and be as responsive to the governor's budget not being fully signed, but also needing to start contracts really early on July 1. There will be further rounds from this first round. We will complete all scoring and evaluations for submitted applications by June 9th. After awards have been made, we will immediately follow up with draft agreements for your awarded applicants. And the project summary information, budget, and milestones, as I mentioned before, are going to be inserted directly into the contracts template with maybe some edits from myself. You are supposed to review and adjust the contract as much as you desire at that time, ask questions. A lot of the template is often set by Office of Financial Management, and I don't have as much flexibility there, but certainly those elements around your timeline, your scope, those kinds of things can be adjusted at this time. So finally, again, once they've all been completed, we circulate a copy of the contracts, DocuSign to all parties, and that is when you are active and may begin invoicing and expending for expenses on the contract. So again, I just want to call out, I know this is compressed, this is very difficult to respond to this quickly, but that's purely for if you absolutely need to start your project July 1, this first window is for you. If
Adam, you're cut out.
tell I've been talking too long because my headphones automatically shut off.
Oh
So
my God.
apologies for that.
Okay, you're back.
No worries. That was my indication that I've been long-winded so far. We're almost done, gang. I promise I'll be done soon. Okay, so if funds remain following round 1, we will maintain a rolling monthly timeline until all available funds have been allocated. So let's take a look at that. Here's a preview of that monthly timeline. If you've heard of the WCCN before, it's a very familiar one, but by the 21st day of every month, we ask that you submit your applications. Within the following 2 weeks, somewhere about that time, we anticipate reviewing all the applications and returning them with feedback or an invitation, or sorry, a contract negotiation. And then it takes about, again, 2 to 3 weeks, and the same process repeats. DocuSign is the official date of your contract start, and it goes over again. We will send formal notice if these timelines change, and we will make sure and notify any applicants if funds have been completely expended and we are unable to make more awards at that time. We'll, of course, put an announcement on our website as well. So let's take a quick look at all the tools available to you throughout this process to make sure your application can be the best possible. Here's just a brief preview of where your resources will be and what to find within them. So if at any time you have questions or concerns, I recommend contacting our email, wccn@ofm.wa.gov. I'll put that in the chat as well. You should be able to click on these links here in blue with an underline in case you need them right now, and they should be able to take you to the resources as well, which is a cool Teams feature. Sorry, I won't go through all of this in detail, but essentially the toolkit, as I mentioned many times, covers everything we've gone over today. The application preview, which you'll see has 2 lines here for Tier 1 and Tier 2, is a Word document version of the Smartsheet form. And I highly recommend you use this to draft your answers rather than typing them directly into the form and then submitting it. It's just going to cause you a lot more problems if you wait until you get that actual form to start. And especially if you're trying to apply for round 1, having the preview is a really valuable way, especially if you feel you're very aligned and very eligible for the WCCN. Lastly, at the bottom, we have the budget worksheet. This Excel workbook contains 2 sheets and is required to be uploaded to the application itself. The primary sheet contains the eligible expense areas for your project budget, which we kind of looked through before. And then the second sheet contains anticipated rates for member stipends by county. You can adjust these rates and indicate so whenever you're applying, but that is our goal to kind of see a baseline figure for stipends. One thing I'll just note when we get to the Q&A in just a few slides, I'll go back and I can go to any of these slides if you have extra questions or you want to see information again. Okay, so let's just talk about briefly, I want to make sure and outline for the key applicant documents, you get the toolkit. It outlines everything we've gone through in the webinar today, including our awarding priorities and restrictions, contracting and commitments, reporting and performance, those things you might want to know before you join. The application preview itself, though, is exactly as described. It contains each of the sections, which is applicant, contact, and tier level, your project overview, the location of your project, how you're benefiting the community, and your timeline for the project, how you're benefiting the architect and developing their resilience, and what's your budget. In all, for a Tier 2 application, 17 questions. For a Tier 1, 14 questions. Most of them are narrative. There are some that are drop down or multiple choice. But our goal is, again, brevity. Do not feel like you have to explain to us why it's a problem. Explain to us why the project is a really great project and addresses the problem. And we will agree with you that we need to do more to address the effects of climate change. Finally, once you've reviewed all these documents, we'll take a look at the letter of intent. And this is the second to last slide, gang, so we're almost there. This form is relatively simple, and again, it's very similar to last year's. At the top, we have the timeline, which I laid out on a couple slides ago, talking about round 1 timeline and rolling timeline. These fields here that I've circled in red contain some information about your proposal and contact information. Again, tell us what tier, tell us who you are, what county are you going to be in. And then at the bottom, I have bulleted out a list of items to be captured in your letter of intent and a box for you to upload. This box here is a drag and drop box at the bottom. So if you have your file up on your browser, you can easily drop it in there. If you're using your mobile device, you can tap the blue words that say browse files, and it should be able to also attach it there like you would to an email, for example. There is no specific file format required, but we do find PDFs work the best. So if you can do that, that's probably the easiest. Once you've uploaded a file to the form, you click the button at the bottom of the page to submit your letter. You'll notice on each of the Smartsheet forms as well, you can check this box that says send me a copy of my responses. That's a helpful way to track what all was submitted. And it might not be useful for the letter of intent because you're really just uploading a letter. But for your application, I highly recommend you check that box because it'll send it right into your inbox and you can keep track of what all was sent to the WCCN for your project. Again, all questions sent to our email address. At this point, you are ready to review the toolkit, the application preview. We will follow up with any follow-up questions that aren't answered in the remaining time we have available. And if you're eligible but the project is not aligned with the WCCN, we might offer some feedback to you and encourage you to revise or resubmit as desired. At this time, I want to really encourage people to apply for the projects that they believe are best rather than give a scattershot approach. It's best to say, here's the thing I want to apply for, and allow us to be the bad guys of saying that doesn't quite fit, or that's not quite what we're looking for, or it doesn't match our priorities or goals at this time, and then allow you to resubmit. If you want to take the approach of trying to apply for five letters of intent with 5 different projects, we're going to take the first one you submit, and then again go back and forth of the letters you submit. So try to just focus on one letter of intent with the specific projects you want in that one window, and then we'll go back again if we have to revise or resubmit. Before I open it up to questions, I just want to say, great job. Thank you for sticking with us all the way through to the end of this webinar. If you have any further questions, I encourage you to use this email address. Again, you should be able to click on that link. I think it'll work. And email us for any other inquiry in case you can't stick around for the rest of our questions today. I want to really reiterate, we are interested in growing partners through our grant program to areas we have never been to before, to areas that really need investments in climate resiliency. And even if you're not eligible for a grant contract, we still think if you're here today especially, you could be a valued member of the network. We are interested in finding partners who are hosting trainings, who are developing skills around the state, and are also advancing similar climate resiliency goals. So I want to wish you all good luck, and we're going to open it up here for questions here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment, but I promise you I'll come right back to it so I can see who else here. I see Matt's come back on too. So we'll start off with Tim here. I see you have a question. I'll let you unmute, and then I'll take a few more from the chat as well. So thanks for joining us. Go ahead, Tim. Oh, it seems like you're still muted. You might be able to unmute yourself in the top right corner of the screen now. Would be a webinar if it wasn't a few technical difficulties. Apologies for that, Tim. I do see you're able to unmute, but for some reason it's not happening. Let me know if you come back up to it, and you should be able to ask your question at any time. If not, you can put it in the chat or get in touch with me otherwise. Okay, I do see Deb said, please review the definition of architects. Thank you. Yeah, Matt nails it correctly. They're what I call our service members. We call them architects because they're linking the nodes of the network together. Oh, mute is still grayed out. All right, let me make an adjustment here. Let's see, Matt, we didn't plan all of the possible opportunities here for what could happen. You never know.
We certainly did go through that, but it's fun to see teams throwing us a curveball.
Okay, I've allowed folks to be able to unmute themselves. If you would please raise your hand before unmuting, I should be able to do that at this time. Tim, you're back.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead. Yeah, I can hear you. Excellent.
Okay, great. I was just wondering about the 10% ICR. If we have a federally negotiated indirect cost rate, are we able to use that, or do we have to stick to the 10%?
Matt, do you want to answer this one, or do you want me to take it?
So just so I understand, you have a federal grant or something that you are also using to co-fund some sort of project,
No,
and
as an organization, we negotiate our indirect cost rate with the federal government every year, and they tell us what it's supposed to be. So, for example, it's 16.43% for this fiscal year. And that's what we use for any partnership or budget that we create.
okay, yeah, I think in that type of situation, then that's probably fine.
Yeah, I think Matt's right. We usually, on a case-by-case basis, we'll look at those and we'll submit it to OFM. And if, as long as they approve it and you have some sort of documentation demonstrating why this isn't like an arbitrary thing, those usually get approved. But we don't make a blanket statement of them until we see those documentations. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way up. Matt, were there any questions in the chat I may have missed while I was blathering throughout the last hour? Oh, you're still muted there, Matt.
Sorry, there's a bunch here in the chat, so we're scrolling back up here.
I see one.
So yeah, so what is the upper limit of the hemlock level 100K? We put 100K because that, based on the last biennium, what we saw would be the type of project that we were looking to fund that would cover perhaps an entire year. In some cases now we have the ability to issue contracts that would be for the entire biennium, or up until, you know, a point when it starts after July 1 until the end of June of 27. So in some cases, those dollar amounts would be over 100,000. But because of our budget reduction, it is going to be much more competitive and unlikely that we're going to be able to issue large grant amounts. Many of them, I hope we'll be able to do a few, but because our budget was slashed, our ability to fund very large projects is limited. We want to be able to fund as many opportunities, especially in parts of the state where we have no presence for the next biennium.
I agree. Yeah, and I apologize if that was deceiving. It wasn't meant to be a cap, but that was about what we saw for about a year's worth of projects, probably 3 to 4 members being supported. I do see one up from Ted. I just want to call out, and then we'll go here to Diane. Ted asked, would love to hear what buy-in-for theory of change is. Matt, would you want to take a first answer at that, or do you want me to?
I mean, I would say, Ted, you know, I think that after you type that, Adam was referencing it several times as really what it means. So I guess want to ask Ted, did that answer your question already when he was talking about it, or would you like us to talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, thank you. Just really briefly, because I did see it referenced on other slides, and it's just not a term I've heard before. So a really quick definition would help me.
Sure. So from our perspective, the idea of these types of service projects that we're looking to fund are born out of ideas or needs that arise directly from members of a community. And the idea is that we're not coming in there and telling them, you know, we want you to do this type of project. It's that the community has a need, or that they have identified something that they can or want to do that they need some assistance with, that is going to use members of that community to actually accomplish that project. I would say that that's probably the simplest way I would describe it. And Adam, feel free to expand if you have anything else to add.
I think that's great.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.
All right, but before we go back to the chat, I'll see here. Diane's got her hand raised. Diane, go right ahead.
Can you hear me? Because I've had issues with my mic.
We can hear you.
Awesome.
We can hear you.
Thank you. I did ask the questions in the chat just because it has been a little sketchy. So do we have guidance on the stipend amounts? I know that the Washington Service Corps stipend amounts are set based on federal poverty level and that sort of thing, but are we do we have, is there any guidance on the stipend amounts as we're submitting a preliminary budget? And is there an education award similar to the Washington State the Washington Service Corps, or is it just the stipend? And are we, if we have architects that, if we have a project, it is approved, and we have architects that are serving in that capacity, are we limited to a service term similar to the Washington Service Corps, or can their service run the entire duration of the project? And as a follow-up, the question came
Okay,
up about whether they're
I can't
employees.
remember all the questions you asked, Diane, so we need to kind of go back and deal with them one at a time here, if you don't mind.
Okay, is
So-
there guidance on the stipend?
Adam.
Yeah, so in the budget worksheet document, which will be up on the website and it's required in the application, one of the sheets has a by county expected rate for compensation. It's not a hard limit. We don't have a hard rule, like nothing is dictated to us by AmeriCorps. It's just a way for us to get an idea about what we expect by county people would be getting compensated for. It can be adjusted based on your capacity and ability and how much funds you're requesting, but that's really the closest we have to a specific guidance.
Okay, then is there an education award similar to Washington Service Corps?
No,
Okay.
because the education award is an AmeriCorps piece, and Washington Service Corps being an AmeriCorps program, that is why that is there. This is
Okay.
completely state funded. There are no federal dollars that fund this program.
Okay, if we have a project that runs for the entire biennium, I guess that answers the question then. Are they limited to the 1,700-hour service term, or can they run for the duration of the project if they're on stipend?
They can run for the entirety of the project.
Are they considered employees, or are they
No.
considered, no, they are not. Okay, will they be eligible for the same benefits the AmeriCorps are?
No.
EBT, childcare?
Oh, well, things that are state programs or other federal programs, that depends on that individual's financial situation. We are
Okay.
not going to say whether or not a person is, prohibited for something. It has to do with whatever their personal situation is.
Okay, so if the stipend puts them at a level where they would qualify for EBT and Apple Health, then those are things that then they could apply for. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, I guess that answers my question.
Great questions. Thank you.
Oh, hey, one more. Is there match required?
No. It would be great if a program did have match, and especially in this time when these things are going to be much more competitive because of the limited amount of dollars we have. If there's a way to match funds to give us more bang for the buck, those are certainly going to be more attractive programs during the review period.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, let's go back to the chat. Irene asked, are you interested in networked proposals where multiple entities would individually apply for Hemlock level, but be working in a statewide network? Short answer, yes, but there's a big asterisk here because, as I said before, we have very limited funds, and the ability to issue a number of $100,000 plus grants is not as much as I would like it to be under our current situation. Because remember, we only have about 2.3 million for the entire biennium. So, and we also have never done something like that before. So we're willing to explore that idea, but it would definitely take, I would say, a little bit more time for us to coordinate and understand what we're trying to do. And I personally, I don't think I would feel terribly comfortable with something like that starting on July 1, since it's very different than anything that we have dealt with before. But we are interested in having those conversations. Okay, next looks like Caitlin. Wondering if the personal narrative can be in languages other than English. Would the grantee need to budget for interpretation or translation to English for this? That's an interesting question. I don't speak any other languages fluently myself. I speak, my spouse is from Italy, so my Italian is passable, but something tells me that your application wouldn't be in Italian. And there are contracts that OFM has with translation services. And is anyone from our comms team actually on the webinar right now, Paige or Rachel? No, you're
Don't
not?
believe so.
Okay, well, they would be able to answer that one more directly. Adam, do you have thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I would say it can be on us to get it translated, and we'll communicate with anybody if we're having any issue. But there, as you mentioned, Matt, there are contracts we can engage to do the translation. It would not be on the grantee to submit them in that language. And Smartsheet does have the ability to be translated, especially a lot of common like web browser tools do translate live, and all the text in there should be translatable. So that would be my quick answer. Would be submit in the language you desire, and we will make sure we get it fully reviewed, and we'll communicate if we're having any delays because of that. And no, I would say do not budget for interpretation or translation to English for that.
Okay, Tim's was already answered. Deb answered that. Jill, please state tier 1 and 2 funding ranges. Adam, do you want to go back to the slide?
Yeah, I'll go to the slide.
Or,
yeah, the only cap is really on tier 1. It has the 35,000 dollar cap. Tier 2, as Matt mentioned, we had in there 100,000, but in general, I would say it really just depends on what the range of your service project would be, how long you're planning to do it for, how many members are involved. There is no hard cap on the amount that could be awarded from tier 2. As Matt said, it'll be competitive this year, but there is no formal cap. You want to take a live question here? I see Carrie's got their hand up. Carrie, go right ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I am wondering a couple of things. The number of members that you generally are looking for is one of them.
Could you repeat that again for us?
Number of architects in the project. Is there sort of a vision for that, or is it up to us to determine that?
I'll give an answer, and then Matt, if you have anything to add, I think that'd be helpful too. So for the 35K level, tier 1 level, we budgeted that to, if it was to be fully funding one architect, that's about what we would expect to see. Obviously, if you have match dollars, it can adjust. But in short, there is no specific expected goal. For a tier 2 project, if you're doing something over the course of multiple years and you're asking for a large sum of funding, we would expect that to be scaled up. It's probably 4+ per year being supported. And again, it just depends on if the application is being wholly funded by the WCCN, or if you have dollars from another resource and you're wanting to maybe supplement our funding to expand the reach of it. But in short, there's no specific expectation, and we would ask you as the holder of the project to tell us what you think is necessary to be successful.
Okay. And then my second question is along the lines of the stipend that you all were just talking about. Are we required to use the system of stipends, or can we use an award to fund, pay a wage?
So I just want to really reiterate, they are not employees and will get a living wage, but they won't be expected to receive any specific amount of money. We use that sheet to show our hand about what we expect to receive. It's not a hard and fast rule that you have to follow. Again, if you were to apply and you wanted to compensate somebody, let's say at $20 an hour and we were expecting 15, all you would have to do is just include a little bit of explainer about why you're including that rate and why you think it's appropriate. And of course, we can negotiate at any time too. If you felt as the negotiation went forward, you wanted to change that rate, you could adjust that too. So in short, no exact specific expectation. We want to see that they have a living wage and can thrive and do well while they're serving. That's our main goal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Kai, let's do your question, then we'll go back to the chat.
Kai?
Let me know if you have any troubles there,
Audio?
Kai. There you go.
Ah,
There you go.
Yeah.
Able to?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay,
We
great.
can hear you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just still a little bit confused with the current status of AmeriCorps about the employee piece. I know this, you just referenced this numerous times, but I just kind of need to clear from my own head. If we're no longer working with AmeriCorps, how exactly is service defined? And again, like, can the
You broke up a little bit there at the end. Can they be what?
Of the host organization? Can the architects be employees of the host organization at a specific rate?
Matt, do you want to try this one?
So they can't be employees. I mean, they can in a way that is, if there's an arrangement, so to speak, that your organization has to provide some type of benefit, so to speak. But explicitly, because this is not a jobs program, so to speak, these are service programs, it is important to make the distinction because otherwise then we are not following the law correctly as to how this program is run.
Yeah.
So
So
you may call them employees, because they work at your organization, but as far as we're concerned, and the contract language is that they are service members.
Certainly, yeah, and it's been clear cut to this point because of AmeriCorps, and I guess it's just this ambiguous, challenging time where we would continue at similar rates to what AmeriCorps has provided, but I just how if they're not employees, then what is the other structure? Like, how do you have a service member if you don't have an AmeriCorps structure? What other mechanism is there to get them the funding outside of bringing them on as employees?
Okay, I think I understand. So yes, the fiduciary agent that is the contractee that handles the funds that are coming is obviously going to be the one that is in charge of dispersing funds to service members. So that is totally reasonable. And I know that Kai, you're part of a unique group of folks on the call that have worked primarily in the AmeriCorps world, but Adam and I have done contracts in the past couple of years with the network with other organizations that are not AmeriCorps. So we can also help sort of parlay that transition from something that is federal AmeriCorps to something else. But yes, whatever the organization, let's say San Juan Island Conservation District would be the signatory, and we would be able to make sure that however you are dispersing funds that you're asking for reimbursement are done through the process that your organization is most familiar with is totally fine. I think I'm answering that, but help me out if I need to expand more.
Yeah, no, I think that's clear. Thank you so much.
Okay, super. Thanks, Kai.
Thanks,
Okay,
Kai. We got a lot of questions in the chat. I see Caitlin asked, we have 2 offices within Washington State that operate distinctly, but do share a federal tax ID number. Can these sites apply separately? I'll say I don't see any particular issue stopping them, but I do think for receiving funds, Matt, I believe they might be considered the same organization.
Probably. And also, I don't want to make it seem like we're encouraging people to kind of double dip for the same project. If you have a project, I think it's appropriate that you submit one application for the work that you're going to be doing and not use multiple organizations to try and get multiple grant awards for the same project. Because that's kind of how I read that question. I don't understand why you would apply for 2 different grants from 2 different organizations.
Yeah, I would probably encourage a little bit of coordination between the offices and then applying as one and maybe positioning members at multiple ones, but there would still be one contract with that org ID or that federal tax ID at the end of the day. Caitlin also asked, is there an expectation that a certain percentage or proportion of the grant budget goes to the architect stipend? No, is the answer. I seem to recall you had age restrictions for architects. Please review the requirements for architects. So I'll pull that slide up as well, Caitlin. In our definitions when we were established, it mentions youth and includes ages 17 to 31 years old. But you'll notice in bold, there's this word or. They could be a U.S. military veteran, doesn't include an age there, or they could be somebody with a physical or sensory disability, no age requirement there, or they could come from a vulnerable population in an overburdened community, again, no age requirement there as well. So these are different categories that could automatically check that they are eligible to be an architect. They do not have to be all tied together. So they do not have to be 17 to 31. It's just that people aged 17 to 31 do qualify.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So, for example, if your project, is in an overburdened community, and you had a 15-year-old that you wanted to be a part of the project, they would still qualify because they come from a vulnerable population in an overburdened community.
Carrie asks, in the event AmeriCorps programs do not come back online, could organizations explore hosting their own non-AmeriCorps interns and including expenses related to providing healthcare coverage plus a stipend?
Hosting their non. When you say intern, that word means something. I have multiple definitions. So I would hope for a little bit of clarity in that one. But I'll say that I've definitely been working with our AmeriCorps team at CERT Washington quite a bit over the last month since things have kind of been upended, and had conversations with a lot of our AmeriCorps programs that also receive match funding from the Climate Corps Network in order to carry out their programs. And many of those organizations have been exploring multiple routes to allow their AmeriCorps members to continue service in some way, shape, or form. The first one was that some places had flexibility with National Direct or something that was not cut, and they were able to shift service members from one grant to another, one AmeriCorps grant to another. Another is that they were creating sort of internal paid internship programs for those individuals, and the organization was paying the entire cost associated with keeping that individual to continue whatever project they were working on in the absence of federal funding. And the third was the idea that they were becoming an employee of some kind. And I know that Kai, for example, has said that San Juan Island Conservation District, as an example, has been able to bring those people on as employees of the organization to continue their projects for the time period that has been agreed. So when I look at this about AmeriCorps interns, AmeriCorps were service members, again, they're not considered interns. They were considered, or are, the ones that still exist are considered service members. It is a service program. So I would say that if there are people that had traditionally served in an AmeriCorps program that you are looking to continue to engage with your organization using funding from the WCCN, that is something that we could talk about for sure. About what depends on what the project is and what the program is, but you would have to shift the dynamic in some way to make sure that they are, of course, still being considered service members, not employees, not interns, and meeting all the criteria associated with being a WCCN architect.
Definitely a tricky set of questions, I know, especially given the context of AmeriCorps right now. Thanks, Matt.
Totally. Yep.
Diane, I do see your hand. I just want to get through a couple of other questions I saw from other folks, and then I will get to you in just a moment. Teresa asked, we submitted an LOI in late April. Will this LOI be considered for round one funding, or should we resubmit now before the June 2nd deadline? Teresa, I would encourage you to just submit that in the current LOI form that we have up on our website.
Yeah, June 2nd.
For Elizabeth, I see, are architects to be considered employees, or do they have a different classifications? They are not to be considered employees. There's some guidance on the Department of Labor and Industries as well that you can look at that has a bit more about compensating folks who are serving or providing a service and are not being given benefits such as an employee. Is there a general range for the number of architects that can be supported in a project? No specific range. I think if we start going out on a limb there, we start getting ourselves in more trouble. Apply for what you think is appropriate, and we can negotiate from there. Matt, Ariane asks a good question that I think I'd be interested to hear your response. And where in the state have you not had a lot of presence so far?
Sure. I would say the places that we haven't had any presence, and not through any fault of anybody or whatever. Last year was an extraordinary year in a lot of different facets. So we grew the program where we could, and we're very excited, especially to have some of our what I call our plank owner members, people that have joined us since the beginning. But places that we still, I would say, noticeably have some holes, I would say, geographically speaking. North Central, like Ferry and Stevens counties, southeast, especially Asaden and Garfield, down through Walla Walla and the Tri-Cities, the Columbia River Gorge counties of Skamania. We also don't have really much at all in the southwest. So Waikika Pacific, Grays Harbor, and up through the peninsula, Clallam, Jefferson. So I would say in those places, and Cowlitz County also, I would say maybe a little bit of, maybe may have one person in Cowlitz County, if I remember correctly, but those places are where we do not have much of a presence and are going to be looking to do some targeted outreach in those areas, hopefully this summer.
Great, Matt. Diane, we'll go to you and then I'll go back to the chat for there. Go ahead and ask your question.
So if we're, and this may be a question for Matt because he's indicated that he's familiar or he's coordinated this for a couple of different organizations. If your organization is responsible for dispersing the financial the finances, the stipends, are we then, do we have to 1099 them? I mean, how are organizations handling that? And from the point of view of the Washington Service Corps, do you 1099 Service Corps members or service members? I mean, how is that working? I guess I'm curious about that.
So think about this. From the perspective of, I'm not sure I completely understand. Are you asking that if someone is being transitioned from an AmeriCorps program to some other status while continuing the project, how do you deal with the tax reporting?
Well, yeah, because I guess my concern is that if we just 1099, our standard practice would be to 1099 someone because we are providing them with funding for service, right? And that's going to provide them with a significant tax burden because they're going to be responsible for self-employment tax as well as withholding. And I guess I'm wondering how the Washington Service Corps, do service members receive a 1099 for their stipend amount? How does that work? Is it considered income?
Well, I
guess I would have to ask my service members whether they got 1099s.
I'm not as intimately familiar with what Washington Service Corps specifically is doing pertaining to this, so I don't feel comfortable answering that question, but I will reach out to them and we can circle up and I can provide that answer for you. But I don't feel comfortable answering it on behalf of that organization or what they're doing right now because I don't know.
Okay. Is there a list of organizations you're currently partnering with? I don't want to step on any toes in our region, so is that available somewhere on the website?
It is not on the website, but we are hoping that with this the new page that is being developed over the next month and a half, that there will be more just public listings of all those organizations that are up there as well. It is listed in like our press releases and whatnot, so it may actually be on the website in like the media area as to who received grant awards, but we don't have it explicitly on the WCCN website.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Back to the chat. Tim asked, what is a blue economy pathway?
Tim, blue economy just essentially is something maritime based, related, or focused. And that can be a number of different things. It could be restoration projects. It could be blue carbon. It could be energy projects, especially in the maritime industry. A lot of opportunities here in Western Washington, especially where offshore wind or wave energy technologies are being developed or manufactured. It could also be have some type of opportunity where there's a involving maritime credentialing for the type of work that people are going to be doing that requires maritime credentials. So it could be really just about any of those things. But basically, when I say blue, it really just means something associated with the ocean or lakes.
Right. Great. Haley asks, who will be the employer of record for these architects?
Employer of record. I'm not sure how to answer that question just because we're saying they're service members, they're not employees. So you have a fiscal agent that is the other end of the contract with the WCCN that would be submitting the reimbursement requests. But in terms of an employer, again, they're not employees specifically. So I don't think I can, I don't really know how else to answer that.
I agree. And like they are receiving a stipend for, which is basically like a living a living allowance in a way. They're not receiving compensation and benefits for their hours. How many grantees do you currently have? I believe that is 11 right now.
I was just doing the math in my head because I think some of those, I think it was 13, but I think 2 of those projects have since completed. So I think it's 11
Correct.
that go until the end of the end of June.
To clarify, Brian asks, did you say that architects would not be employees of the host site? Are they in fact not allowed to be employees? I think again we go back to our statements before, like from our perspective, we support them through service awards and through service stipends, excuse me. And from there, they're not being treated like a typical employee where they would receive a W-2 and be considered being compensated for the hours and receive vacation time and all those kinds of things. They are conducting a service, and this award is simply a reward for that their service. I don't believe they have a formal employee designation. Carrie asks, is the stipend system required, or can we be awarded funds to use towards personnel costs or hiring architects as staff so we can provide them with benefits? You can use awarded funds to spend on personnel costs. Our goal is to recruit service members to join an organization, learn skills, learn technical abilities, gain certifications, and exposure to a network of career opportunities. We are not interested in supporting an organization to bring on employees, I would say strictly. And Matt, I don't know if there's any clarifiers there or additional color you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would say that the main purpose of these programs really is that the architect is walking away with a skill or credential that they gain through the service project. And the idea is that we are helping them get onto a pipeline, a career pipeline that might lead to it could be leading to a formal apprenticeship. It could be leading toward, the credential they earned could be a certification that they now have that makes them eligible for opportunities in that type of career path that they were working on. So that is the main goal of the service members in their service.
Yes, and I think that on this point too, one of the things we have to try and avoid, and Matt, I think mentioned this earlier, is not duplicating efforts. And
Right.
additionally, if you were to start hiring employees with our funds, there becomes a whole list of issues of, are these employees, are these young folks that are coming to join, young folks or architects coming to join an organization, are they replacing, are they replacing employees? Are there union implications involved if you bring on a member who is doing the work of somebody else who is in a union who's been let go? And it opens us up to a lot of other legal liability. So for that purpose alone, we're really focusing on them receiving a service award, not receiving an employee status for that.
Right, and I would also say that that is something that was very explicit when they created the bill, is that, as Adam just mentioned, we do not duplicate efforts that exist somewhere else in the state, which is also just good government, in my opinion, as well. So especially if there is a trade apprenticeship or something that already exists, we're not going to be duplicating an effort if there already is a certified union trade apprenticeship pathway for that skill or credential.
Diana asked, can a tier 1 project cover the entire biennium?
I guess technically it could. It all just depends on what the costs really are. I mean, if you had a pretty low barrier project for maybe a single individual, I mean, sure.
I agree. And there's also a possibility that we could support an organization that maybe just does summer work, but they would like to do 2 summers of work, and maybe it's a total of 6 months over the course of 2 years. That could certainly be a tier 1 project as well. We more put those time parameters as an expectation that generally tier 1 projects have been short-term, single-year projects, but nothing's stopping you if you'd like to apply for a tier 1 to have throughout the biennium. Caitlin asks, should we have an architect identified prior to applying, or is recruitment for the architect an allowable grant activity? Are architects required to serve full-time or is part-time okay as well? I'll take a swing at this, Matt. First, you do not have to have an architect identified. I don't think it's a harm to your application if you already have somebody. We've certainly had folks apply with that before. The big piece is we want to understand how these architects are being recruited, either pre or post award, and is there a clear connection to the community being involved? So if you've already got somebody that's a friend of yours and then you're going to go place them in an area that they've never been to before in a community they're not familiar with, that might make our eyebrows raise a little bit, but there's no specific requirements around when you do recruitment. Recruitment is an allowable expense, things like goods and services and other items related to, posting the opportunity, hosting interviews with folks. We expect that that might be also allowable, especially for small organizations. Finally, on that, are architects required to serve full-time or is part-time okay? You, again, as the applicants, you designate what the service hours are and you tell us what you think is appropriate. It could look like full-time some weeks and part-time other weeks. It doesn't have to be a consistent schedule necessarily. All we ask is that they're gaining services, gaining credentials, gaining abilities, getting access to networks for career opportunities in the future, and they're completing a service project in the time you've allocated. No specific time requirements during the week or month.
Yes, and also, as I mentioned earlier, we are hoping to also have sort of a landing pad on our website where folks can post opportunities if they do not have a service member lined up so that people can see opportunities and then be linked to those organizations that are seeking those architects.
That's a great point. And even I mentioned earlier some of the network commitments and opportunities that you get from joining the network. One of the things that we've definitely had people come and share in these network calls are opportunities whenever they've maybe got a contract with us in June, but they're going to post a position that starts in August, and we share that across the network as well and try and we encourage our member partners to amplify that word. Great question. And I think I see here, Carrie asked, where will health insurance come from for the architect? Apologize about using the word intern. No worries there, Carrie. I don't believe there's any specific health insurance pieces that we speak to. Organizations can offer that if that's something that you would like to take on. It just depends on how it's done. I don't want to get into the weeds of how any organization runs. And the Department of Labor and Industries does have some other guidance on offering insurance to volunteers or folks who are unpaid as well. Matt, any other suggestions on that response?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Really, just that if there is public assistance healthcare, that again, it's up to the individual's actual financial situation as to determine whether or not they qualify.
Okay. Got some good suggestions from Ted here. One I missed from Diane. Will the Washington Service Corps, Washington Conservation Corps administer the stipend and track the hours as with the AmeriCorps program, or will the host organization be responsible for the financials? Is this a reimbursement grant? A couple questions here. First, the easy one to answer. Yes, this is a reimbursable grant. Folks can bill us as often as monthly. I've also received invoices every other month, every quarter. It just depends on what works best for your organization. Regarding the administering of stipend and tracking the hours, so the organization is asked to administer the stipend and then bill us as the Washington Climate Corps Network for that stipend amount. In your invoicing process, I will ask for some sort of documentation showing that some sort of service was conducted during that time that the stipend occurred, and that can look like an hourly track sheet. It can look like a summary that includes total number of hours worked. I'm less interested in did they clock in at 8 and leave at 5, and I'm more interested in what were their accomplishments, how much service did they conduct during that month, or what activities did they conduct during that time that you're asking for the invoice to be reimbursed. We'll walk through that in more detail later on as well, but in short, you as the agency hosting the architect are going to track what they do, how often they work, when they work, and you're going to pay them and then be reimbursed by us at a frequency that you determine quarterly, monthly, bi-monthly. And then Caitlin links a press release from us, yes, awarding some funds for the Washington Climate Corps Network. And I think
that is not a complete list, but it is a large component of it.
Absolutely. And then some suggestions in the chat. Okay, that's all I see in the chat. I'll just take off the screen share. Is anybody else have a last question? We're right at the end of time here. We can probably squeeze in a couple more if you'd like. I want to really thank everybody for staying with us and attending today's webinar. I know it was a lot of content. The toolkit on our website as well, I'll show in just a moment before we go. I'll point that out where you can find that. Ted, I see you came on camera. Please let me know. What questions do you have? Oh, you're good? Okay, cool. Mariah asks, is my understanding correct that you will not commence applicant review until June 2nd? Yes, Mariah, for the first round, we will be reviewing all applications together, June 2nd through the 10th. Following that round, it returns to that rolling monthly cycle you might have been familiar with from last biennium. Good question.
Of course, the first step being filing the letter of intent.
Correct. Thank you, Matt. Yes, make sure you submit your letter of intent first before you get an application. So I just want to pull up our website. It's undergoing a little bit of a facelift right now, but our website is listed here. It's in the it'll be in your inbox when I send you all a follow-up notice. It's also in the presentation today. But here's what it looks like. It has our logo here on the right and Serve Washington across the top. As you scroll down, you'll see this header that says apply, join the 2025-2027 WCCN grant program. And as you scroll down further, you'll see these blue texts with some items for you to check out. First is the applicant toolkit, then the application preview, and the budget worksheet. I'll make sure that this preview actually is a Word document, not a PDF. Apologies for that. As you go down, you'll see the submit a letter of intent header here, where you'll be able to actually submit your letter of intent. This should be a button right now. It's just text. And that is where you'll go. I'll show you what those documents look like just briefly. Here's what the toolkit looks like, as you can see. It has all of this information linked as well if you'd like to go through and look at what is the webinar. Obviously, you're here for that. How do I apply? What are some information around the partner commitments? What are the reporting requirements? What do the definitions look like? All of that is linked here, and you can navigate as you'd like. Application preview, again, this will be a Word document that'll download. It, again, has all the questions, tells you which ones are scored, how many points are available, and it previews for you the questions you will see in Smartsheet if you're successful in your letter of intent stage. Finally, with the letter of intent, again, if I clicked on this link here under Submit Your Letter of Intent, this page will appear with, again, a reminder of the timing. And then you'll go through, include your name, your preferred email address. We will use that to contact you, so please make sure that's an email address that you like to use or you check regularly. Which counties you're going to support with the project, which tier you'd like to ultimately apply for, and then here on the right, these bullets should be included in your letter of intent. So an overview, summary of the project, which include the names of the communities you propose to support, an estimated budget, very rough numbers there, and then click here to upload or drag and drop a file. Finally, submit here at the bottom, and your letter of intent has been recorded. So that's a really quick preview of what our website looks like now and how to find that information. Thank you all for attending. Oh, I see here Kim asked, do you have a template for the monthly data report delineating the types of activities or impacts you're tracking? We don't have a specific template by monthly data. You will be given a quarterly report via Smartsheet and a closeout report at the end of your contract that has established predictable information. And you'll see in the toolkit as well, Kim, some of the figures we'll be asking for. They aren't going to be incredibly detailed down to specific days or hours worked. That's more in the invoice process. But yes, we do have that in there. So thanks for the question. Okay, 12:33. Thank you all for attending today. We'll upload this up onto our website. I'll link it in the toolkit. Please get those letters in as soon as you can, and we'll do our best to turn them around. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.